Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at cybersecurity,
Ooh,
but from a slightly different angle.
okay.
We're not talking about the latest gadgets or, software updates or anything like that.
Right.
Instead, we're going straight to the source.
Oh,
We've
interesting.
got a whole stack of articles here from some pretty reputable places.
Okay.
Bleeping Computers, Security Week, Cyber News.
Yeah.
Even TechCrunch is getting in on the action.
Wow. So, what kind of stuff are we talking about? What's got everyone buzzing in the cybersecurity world?
Well, let me tell you, it's all on the say. It's a little bit unsettling, to be honest.
Oh.
These articles paint a picture of a digital world, that is.
Oh.
Okay, it was kind of scary.
Okay, well, you've piqued my interest now.
Okay, so basically what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be diving into all of the things that keep cybersecurity professionals up at night.
Ah, I see. So the real threats, the stuff that's actually happening out there.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's dive in.
Okay, so one thing that came up again and again in these articles was ransomware.
Yeah. Ransomware, that's always a hot topic.
And for good reason. I mean, this stuff is no joke. TechCrunch actually had a really interesting article that I thought we could start with.
Okay.
Apparently, 2024 is on track to be another record-breaking year for ransomware attacks.
Not surprising, unfortunately. It feels like we say that every year, though, right?
Right, but it's true, though. I mean, it's not just the number of attacks that's increasing, it's the methods, the tactics that are
But
evolving.
that's even scarier. I mean, how are they changing things up? What should people be looking out for?
Well, the article quotes an analyst from Recorded Future guy named Alan Liska,
Okay.
and he says that there's been a shift towards what he calls extortion-only attacks.
Extortion only? What does that even mean?
So traditionally, ransomware attacks have worked by encrypting a victim's files and then demanding a ransom to decrypt them right.
Right. That's the classic ransomware move.
Well, now hackers are skipping the encryption part altogether.
So they're just stealing the data and then threatening to release it if they don't get paid.
Exactly.
So it's all about the data now, the information itself.
Yep. And it's not just big corporations or governments that are being targeted.
You mean anyone can be a victim?
Anyone. Liska actually mentions that a lot of these hackers are teenagers.
Teenagers.
Yeah, they're using intimidation tactics like, harassing people on social media or even making threats in the real world to pressure victims into paying up.
Wow, that's really disturbing. It's like cyberbullying, but on a whole other level.
And it makes you wonder, right? Like, how do you even protect yourself against that?
It's a tough one for sure. And speaking of targets that are particularly vulnerable, what about government agencies?
Oh, yeah, that's another big concern. InfoSecurity magazine reported a massive surge in malware attacks targeting government systems this year.
How massive are we talking?
Like a 236% increase.
236%. That's insane.
And with the U.S. elections coming up, it makes you think, how secure is our critical infrastructure, really?
It's a little unnerving, right? Especially when you consider the potential for disruption. I mean, imagine if hackers successfully targeted election systems or power grids or hospitals.
Exactly. This isn't just about financial losses anymore. It's about the potential to cause real-world harm.
Okay, that's a good segue, actually, because all this talk about disruption reminds me of the Lottie Files attack. Did you see that one in Bleeping Computer?
Oh, yeah, that was a wild one.
A prime example of what we call a supply chain attack.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term, can you explain what a supply chain attack is?
Sure. So basically, a supply chain attack targets a company or organization through a third-party vendor or service that they rely on.
So it's like hitting them indirectly through a weak link in their supply chain.
Exactly. And the Lottie Files case is a good illustration of how vulnerable we are to these kinds of attacks.
Remind me what happened in that case. It's been a busy news week.
Okay, so Lottie Files is a popular platform for website animations. You know those little moving graphics you see on websites sometimes?
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. They're kind of cool.
Well, hackers managed to compromise a script that's used to display those animations.
And they used it to steal cryptocurrency.
Yep, they injected it with a crypto drainer. So anyone who visited a website that used this compromised script could unknowingly have their cryptocurrency stolen.
How much did they manage to steal?
Well, one user reportedly lost $723,000 in Bitcoin.
Ouch, that's going to leave a mark.
And this wasn't some obscure website either. Lottie Files is used by thousands of websites, including major brands. It really highlights the interconnected nature of the digital world and the potential for these cascading vulnerabilities.
So it's not just about being careful about the websites you visit. It's about the entire ecosystem of software and services that we rely on.
Exactly. You're not just trusting the website you're visiting, you're also trusting all the third-party providers they rely on.
That's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it.
It is. And it brings us to another critical area of concern: Zero-day vulnerabilities.
Oh, yeah, those are the scary ones.
Yeah. Bleeping Computer had an article about a case involving PTZ optics cameras.
Those are like security cameras.
Yeah, they're used in all sorts of places, industrial sites, healthcare facilities, even courtrooms.
And they had some pretty serious vulnerabilities.
Two critical ones. Hackers could exploit them to remotely execute code.
So basically, someone can take control of these cameras.
Potentially, yes. Imagine the implications if someone gained control of cameras in a courtroom or a government building.
That's terrifying.
And what makes zero-day vulnerabilities so dangerous is that they're essentially secret back doors that hackers discover before anyone else knows about them.
So there's no patch or protection available.
Not until the vulnerability is discovered and a patch is developed, which can take time.
So in the meantime, these systems are just wide open to attack.
Pretty much. In the case of PTZ optics, these vulnerabilities were actively being exploited before a patch was even available.
That's crazy. And I bet even after a patch is released, it takes time for everyone to update their systems.
Absolutely. It highlights the importance of communication between vendors and users. Users need to be informed about vulnerabilities and how to mitigate them, and they need to be able to trust that vendors are doing everything they can to patch these flaws quickly and effectively.
So it's a two-way street.
Exactly. And we saw a similar issue with Fortinet's cybersecurity dive reported on a zero-day vulnerability in their FortiManager tool.
What's a FortiManager?
It's a tool that a lot of organizations use to manage their firewalls and other security devices.
A pretty critical piece of software.
Very critical. And even though Fortinet released patches for the vulnerability, hackers were still targeting exposed admin panels.
So they were basically taking advantage of the fact that not everyone had updated their systems yet?
Exactly. It put thousands of organizations at risk.
Seems like a constant race against time. You patch one vulnerability and then another one pops up.
It can feel that way. And that leads us to what might be the most persistent and challenging vulnerability of all: human error.
Ah, yes. The weakest link.
Cyber News had an article that pointed out that despite all the advancements in technology, phishing and ransomware continue to be the most pressing cybersecurity threats.
And that's largely because humans are still very much fallible.
You can't really install a software update to fix human behavior, can you?
Nope. No matter how sophisticated our security systems get, we're always going to be vulnerable to social engineering and trickery.
That's why security awareness training is so important. It's about educating people about the threats and giving them the tools to recognize and avoid risky situations.
Speaking of risky situations, did you see the Norton Cyber Safety Insights report for 2024? Dark Reading covered it. Apparently, nearly half of U.S. consumers encountered online scams while holiday shopping.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
It makes sense, though. Everyone's looking for deals, and scammers are ready to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. The report highlighted some of the tactics they use: fake discount codes, social media ads leading to phishing sites. They're even using AI to create more convincing scams.
So it's more important than ever to be vigilant, especially during peak shopping seasons.
Right. We tend to let our guard down when we're excited about finding a bargain, and that's exactly what scammers prey on.
So always double-check URLs, look for secure connections, and if a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Good advice. All right. Moving on, let's talk about data breaches and their impact.
Okay, so this is where things get real.
These aren't just abstract events. They have real-world consequences for individuals and organizations.
The Mystic Valley Elder Services data breach is a perfect example.
Oh, yeah, that was a heartbreaking one. Security Week had the details.
So this was a nonprofit organization in Massachusetts that supports elderly and disabled individuals,
And the breach affected a staggering 87,000 people.
exposing their Social Security numbers, health and financial data, even online credentials,
It's a reminder that data breaches can have a devastating impact on people's lives.
especially for vulnerable populations like the elderly, who might be more susceptible to identity theft and financial exploitation.
Exactly. And then there's the American Water case. Daily Security Review reported that 9 class action lawsuits have been filed against the company following a breach.
Even though they haven't fully disclosed the details of what happened.
It just shows you the legal and financial ramifications of data breaches and how the lack of transparency can erode trust and fuel anxiety for customers who are left in the dark.
It's a mess all around.
Yeah.
And it gets even scarier when you consider that InfoSecurity magazine reported that over 80% of U.S. small businesses experienced a breach in the past year.
With the average cost of a breach more than doubling to $500,000.
That's a huge hit for any business, but especially for smaller ones that might not have the resources to recover.
It's a wake-up call for all organizations to prioritize cybersecurity and have a plan in place to prevent breaches and mitigate the damage if one does occur.
So it's not just about having the right technology, it's about having the right processes and procedures in place as well.
Exactly. And communication is key, both internally and externally.
Transparency is so important, especially when it comes to data breaches.
Agreed. Okay, so far we've talked a lot about big trends and statistics, but I think it's important to bring this down to a more personal level and look at some individual stories that illustrate the human element of cyber threats.
I like that, because sometimes these threats can feel abstract and distant until you hear about how they're affecting real people.
Exactly. So, for example, Cyber News reported on a case involving a former Disney worker, Michael Scheuer, who allegedly hacked the company's restaurant menu software after being fired.
What? Why would he do that?
It seems to have been driven by revenge and a desire to cause disruption. He allegedly removed peanut allergy warnings from menu items, added profanities, and even redirected QR codes to an anti-Israel website.
Wow, that's messed up.
It's a chilling example of how insider threats can be motivated by personal grudges and have the potential to cause real harm, even endangering people's health in this case.
Luckily, Disney caught the changes before the menus were distributed.
Yeah, that could have been really bad.
It raises some important questions, though, about employee vetting access control and how to prevent disgruntled employees from using their knowledge and access to cause harm.
No easy answers, but it's definitely something organizations need to be mindful of.
We also have the case of Jack Teixeira, the Pentagon secrets leaker.
Oh yeah, that was a big one. Security Week had a whole article about it.
He shared classified documents about the Ukraine war and U.S. intelligence with users on Discord.
A platform primarily used for gaming and socializing.
And now prosecutors are seeking a nearly 17-year prison sentence for him.
It highlights the severity of data leaks and their potential impact on national security.
It also makes you think about the responsibility of online platforms to prevent this kind of thing from happening.
Absolutely. They have a role to play in protecting their users and the information they share.
Then there's the Fish and Ships campaign that Bleeping Computer reported on.
That's a catchy name.
It was a pretty sophisticated operation that targeted online shoppers with fake product listings.
Redirecting them to fraudulent sites designed to steal their personal and payment information.
So a classic phishing scam, but with a twist.
What's concerning about this campaign is that the attackers exploited legitimate online stores, making their fake listings appear even more convincing.
So even if you're shopping on a website you trust, you still need to be cautious.
Always double-check URLs, look for secure connections, and be wary of deals that seem too good to be true.
And finally, we have the BitTorrent vulnerability.
Oh, the one that was lurking for 14 years.
Yeah, that's the one. It exposed users to man-in-the-middle attacks.
For 14 years, it really makes you wonder what other vulnerabilities might be lurking in the software we use every day.
So this vulnerability stemmed from a failure to validate SSL/TLS certificates, which are essentially digital signatures that verify the authenticity of a website.
Without these certificates being properly validated, attackers could potentially intercept and alter network data, putting users at risk of having their information stolen or their devices compromised.
And this could have been avoided with proper security practices and timely patching.
It's a reminder that even well-established software can have serious vulnerabilities and that staying up to date with patches is crucial.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
From the rise of ransomware to supply chain attacks, zero-day vulnerabilities, human error, and the real-world impact of data breaches.
It can feel overwhelming, but remember, knowledge is power. By understanding these threats and the tactics used by cybercriminals, we can all take steps to better protect ourselves and our organizations. And it's not about, living in fear.
Right.
It's about being aware, being prepared.
So where do we even begin? I mean, with all these threats, vulnerabilities, it can feel pretty overwhelming.
It's true. It can. But honestly, some of the most effective things you can do are also the simplest.
Okay, like what?
Well, for starters, good old-fashioned cyber hygiene.
Okay, so we're talking strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. It might seem basic, but trust me, it makes a huge difference.
I know I should be better about that. I admit sometimes I get lazy and reuse passwords.
I get it. We all do. But it's really important to have strong, unique passwords for each of your accounts.
And multi-factor authentication whenever possible.
Absolutely. It adds an extra layer of security that can really trip up those hackers.
Okay, so think of it like a castle.
A castle.
Yeah, strong passwords are your walls. Multi-factor authentication is like a moat. And being cautious online is like having guards on the lookout.
I like that analogy. So your defenses are strong,
right,
but you also need to be vigilant.
Right. Always be on the lookout for anything suspicious.
Exactly. And just like a real castle, your cybersecurity needs constant upkeep.
So staying informed about new threats, updating software, being aware of the latest scams.
It's an ongoing effort, but it's worth it.
And it's not all on individuals, right? Organizations have a huge role to play in all of this too.
Absolutely. They need to have a solid security strategy in place.
So not just focusing on the technology, but also training employees, having incident response plans,
Yeah.
and communicating effectively.
All of that is critical. And transparency is key, especially if there's a data breach.
Right. Remember the American Water case? Their lack of communication just made the situation worse.
Exactly. A breach isn't just a tech problem, it's a business and PR problem too.
And it's not like companies are on their own, right? The government has a responsibility here as well.
Absolutely. Setting laws, providing resources, working with other countries to combat cybercrime. It's a huge issue that requires a coordinated effort.
So it's a shared responsibility from individuals all the way up to the global level.
Exactly. And we haven't even touched on the impact of emerging technologies like AI and quantum computing.
Oh yeah, those are game changers for sure.
They have the potential to revolutionize cybersecurity, both for better and for worse.
So it's not just about keeping up with the technology, it's about understanding how it can be used and misused.
And making sure that it's used responsibly and ethically, that's a whole other can of worms.
So where does this leave our listeners? How can they navigate this increasingly complex threat landscape?
Well, one thing that struck me while reading these articles was that a lot of the vulnerabilities we're seeing aren't necessarily new.
What do you mean?
I mean, to take the Yahoo News from Security Week. They disclosed some serious flaws in their NetIQ iManager software.
That's the tool that a lot of businesses use to manage their networks, right?
Exactly. And the vulnerabilities they found weren't exactly cutting edge.
So old vulnerabilities are still a problem.
They can be, especially if they haven't been patched or if organizations aren't aware of them.
So it's not just about the latest and greatest threats, it's about making sure the basics are covered.
Exactly. And in the case of iManager, the vulnerabilities could allow attackers to do some pretty serious damage.
Like what?
Well, they found things like CSRF, SSRF authentication, bypass privilege escalation.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break those down for me.
Sure. So CSRF stands for cross-site request forgery. It's a way for attackers to trick users into performing actions they didn't intend to.
So like clicking on a malicious link that makes them unknowingly transfer money or change their password.
Exactly. And then there's SSRF, or server-side request forgery. This one's a little more technical, but basically it allows attackers to trick a server into making requests to other systems that it shouldn't be able to access.
So they could potentially steal data or even take control of the service.
Exactly. And the researchers who found these flaws in iManager were actually able to chain several of them together to gain remote access to corporate networks.
So it's like a combination lock. They find one vulnerability, then another, until they have full access.
Pretty much. And it really highlights the importance of having a layered security approach.
So not just relying on one single security measure, but having multiple layers of defense.
Exactly. Because if one layer fails, the others can still hold the line.
So what can organizations do to protect themselves? It seems like a never-ending battle to stay ahead of the bad guys.
It can feel that way, but there are things you can do. One of the most important is to have a proactive security mindset.
So instead of just reacting to threats, you're actively trying to anticipate and mitigate them before they become a problem.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a reactive to a proactive approach.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, there are a few key areas to focus on. First, vulnerability scanning and penetration testing.
What are those?
So vulnerability scanning is basically like running a security check on your entire network, looking for any known weaknesses that attackers could exploit.
And penetration testing is like a simulated attack.
Exactly. You're hiring ethical hackers to try to break into your system so you can identify and fix any vulnerabilities before the bad guys find them.
That makes sense. So it's like a fire drill for your cybersecurity.
Exactly. And then there's threat intelligence monitoring.
What's that?
It's basically keeping tabs on the latest threats and tactics used by cybercriminals.
So you can stay one step ahead of them.
Exactly. There are all sorts of resources out there that can help you with this. Security blogs, threat intelligence platforms, government agencies.
It sounds like you need a whole team of experts just to keep up with all of this.
It can be complex, but there's help available. There are security consultants, managed security service providers, and even government agencies that offer guidance and support.
So you don't have to go it alone.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we've talked about the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the importance of awareness and proactive security measures. But I want to bring it back to our listeners. What's the one thing they should do starting today to be safer online?
That's a great question. And honestly, it might sound a little too simple,
Okay.
but one of the most impactful things anyone can do is just pause before you click.
Pause before you click.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's amazing how often we just click on things without thinking.
I'm definitely guilty of that.
We all are. It's like our brains are wired to just react to those flashing buttons and tempting links.
So you're saying we need to break that habit and actually think before we click.
Exactly. Whether it's a link in an email, a tempting offer on social media, or even just a software update notification, take a moment to pause and ask yourself a few questions.
Like what kind of questions? Well, first of all, do you trust the sender? Does this email or message seem legitimate?
That's a good one. I get so many phishing emails these days. It's hard to keep up.
Right. So always be wary of unsolicited emails or messages, especially if they're asking you to click on a link or download something.
Okay. What else?
Think about the offer itself. Does it make sense? Is it too good to be true?
Ah, yes, the classic too good to be true test.
It's a classic for a reason because it works. Scammers often use enticing offers to lure people into their traps.
So if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
9 times out of 10, yeah.
Hmm.
And finally, if you're ever unsure about a link or a website, just take a moment to double-check the URL.
Make sure it's the official website and not some fake lookalike site.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Those few seconds of critical thinking can really save you a lot of trouble down the line.
I like that. It's not about being a tech expert. It's about being a little more mindful about our online actions.
Exactly. It's about developing those safety reflexes just like we lock our doors and look both ways before crossing the street.
It's about transferring those real-world safety instincts to our online lives.
Exactly. And remember, cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. We're all learning and adapting as the threat landscape evolves.
It's important to stay informed about new threats and vulnerabilities and to keep our software and devices up to date.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask for help or seek out information. There are tons of resources available online and from organizations like the National Cybersecurity Alliance and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Great resources.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, it sounds like the key takeaway here is that we all have a role to play in making the digital world a safer place.
Absolutely. It's a shared responsibility from individuals and organizations all the way up to governments and international bodies.
We need to be aware, proactive, and supportive of each other.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is really about protecting people.
Well said. And that's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive into the world of cybercrime and security.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there in the digital world.